The truth was a shard of ice lodged in his heart. For days, Liam moved through his life like a ghost. The numbers on his screens were meaningless glyphs. The food he ate had no taste. Every time he looked at Leo, he saw the accident. And every time he thought of Clara, he saw the same dot. He was trapped in a paradox of unbearable proportions. The only person who had managed to pierce the fortress of his son's silence was a living, breathing reminder of the very event that had built those walls. How could he allow her in? How could he keep her away? He went back to the bistro. A week after the report, he told himself he was going to confront her, to demand what? He didn't know. He just knew he had to see her again, to look into the eyes of the other survivor. She was wiping down a table, her movements efficient and graceful. When she saw him, her smile was genuine, warm. Mr. Croft, hello, is your little engineer with you today? Liam, he corrected, his voice rough. No, not today. Her smile faded slightly, sensing the tension in him. Is everything okay? He gestured to a vacant table. Could you sit for a moment? When you have a break. She glanced around the near-empty restaurant. My break's in 10 minutes. He waited, each second in agony. When she finally sat opposite him, sliding a cup of tea across the table, he was struck by how young she looked, and yet how old her eyes were. They were eyes that had seen the abyss. He knew that look. He saw it every morning in the mirror. I have to ask you something, he began, his fists clenched under the table. The accident, 2 years ago, on the I-94. Clara flinched as if he'd struck her. All the color drained from her face. She looked down at her hands, at the faint, silvery scars that crisscrossed her wrist scars. He now understood. How do you know about that? My wife, he said, the words ash in his mouth. Sarah, she died in that accident. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a horror so profound it stole his breath. No, she whispered, no. The report said a jackknifed truck. It was a chain reaction. My wife's car was one of the first hit. Your parents, their car was behind hers. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over instantly. I was in the passenger seat, she choked out. I saw it all. The truck, it came through the median. I saw the blue sedan. I saw it. She put a hand over her mouth, stifling a sob. All this time? Your son? That's why? That's why he doesn't speak? Liam finished, his own vision blurring. The room felt airless. Here she was, the ghost from his nightmare, and she was crying for his wife. For him? For Leo? I'm so sorry. She wept, the words ragged. I'm so sorry. Why are you sorry? He asked, genuinely bewildered. Because I lived. She burst out, her composure shattering. I lived, and your wife didn't. And my parents didn't. For 2 years, I've asked myself why. I've wished 1,000 times it was me instead. And now, to meet you, to meet your beautiful boy. She broke down completely, her shoulders shaking, and in that moment, every plan of confrontation, every shred of anger, melted away. He wasn't looking at an antagonist in his story. He was looking at a fellow survivor, shipwrecked on the same desolate shore. Her grief was not a rival to his. It was its mirror image. He reached across the table, his billionaire's hand covering her waitress's, scarred and stained with ink. Her fingers were cold. You have nothing to be sorry for, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. It was a tragedy. No one's fault. They sat there for a long time. Two strangers bound by the worst day of their lives. Holding hands in a quiet bistro as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows. What he did next changed everything. He didn't offer her money. He didn't set her up in a fancy apartment. He offered her a job. Leo responded to you, he said. A few days later, after he had found the courage to call her, no one else has been able to reach him like that. I'm not asking you to be his therapist. I'm asking you to be his friend. To come to our house a few afternoons a week. To just be with him. To play. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Liam, I don't know. That's a lot. Please, he said, and the word was foreign on his tongue. Liam Croft never begged. You're the only one who understands the silence. She came the next day, and the day after that, she brought picture books and pots of paint, a small keyboard, and a bag of river stones that made different sounds when you clacked them together. She never forced Leo to speak. She built a world of sound around him, and slowly, tentatively, he began to step into it. Liam watched from the doorway, his heart a tangled mess of awe and a growing, terrifying affection. He saw the light return to his son's eyes. He heard new sounds, giggles, squeals of delight, and eventually, hesitant, single-syllable words. Ba, for ball. Mo, for more. Each one was a miracle. T and Clara began to talk. First about Leo, then about everything. They shared their memories of that day, piecing together the fragmented horror until it lost some of its power. They talked about art and music and their broken childhoods. He learned her dream was to open a community art center for children with special needs. She learned that beneath his billionaire exterior was a man who missed his wife so desperately it was a physical ache. Months bled into a year. Leo was speaking in short sentences. The penthouse was no longer silent. It was filled with the sounds of life, of laughter, of a future. Liam found himself falling in love with Clara, with her resilience, her kindness, the way she made his broken world feel whole again. He saw the way she looked at him, too, with a hesitant, hopeful love. He decided to make a grand gesture. He would fund her art center. He would call it the Sarah and Maria Center, after their lost loved ones. It would be a testament to their survival, their love, their new beginning. He planned it all for a Saturday evening. He cooked her favorite meal. He had the architectural plans rolled up on the dining table. He would ask her to move in, to be a permanent part of their family. Leo, now a chatterbox, was buzzing with excitement, knowing a happy surprise was coming for Clara. When the doorbell rang, Liam's heart soared. This was it, the start of the rest of their lives. He opened the door, a smile on his face that froze and then shattered. Clara stood on the doorstep, her face pale and streaked with tears. She wasn't dressed for dinner. She looked like she had been running. "Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I can't do this anymore." His world skidded to a halt. "What, Clara? What's wrong?" "I got the letter today," she said, holding up a crumpled piece of official-looking paper. "From the county clerk's office. I'd requested the full unredacted police report from the accident. I needed to finally see it for myself." A cold dread began to creep up Liam's spine. "Why would you do that? We know what happened, do we?" she asked, her eyes searching his, full of a pain so deep it seemed bottomless. "The report? It has the witness statements. From the truck driver, from the other cars." She took a shaky breath. "It describes the sequence of events. The jackknifed truck was the cause. But the fatal collision, the one that killed my parents, and your wife," she looked at him, and in her gaze, he saw the unforgettable twist. The truth he had buried so deep he had almost convinced himself it wasn't real. "It says the initial impact was survivable. It was the car behind them, the one that failed to brake in time, that plowed into the wreckage and caused the fire. The car that was speeding, that was switching lanes erratically." Her voice broke. The witness described it. A black Porsche Panamera. Liam felt the floor drop out from beneath him. The air turned to lead in his lungs. The memory he had suppressed, the guilt he had drowned in work and grief, surged forward, vivid and monstrous. He had been late for a meeting. He was frustrated, distracted. He was driving too fast. Sarah had called. They'd argued about him missing Leo's pediatrician appointment. He'd seen the brake lights, the chaos ahead. He'd swerved, slamming his foot not on the brake, but skidding, losing control. The impact, the scream of metal. Then, the terrifying silence, followed by the first lick of flames. He had walked away with a concussion. The investigators, given his status, his distraught state, the complexity of the pilot loop, had attributed the primary blame to the jackknife truck. His role had been minimized, filed away. He had let them. He had paid the right people to ensure it. He had never told a soul. He had buried the truth, even from himself. "It was you, Liam," Clara whispered, the words a death sentence. "You were in that car. You were the final impact. You killed my parents. You killed your own wife." Leo, who had been listening from the hallway, let out a small, confused whimper. Liam could only stare. The architect of his own hell, exposed, the fairy tale he had built over the past year, the love, the hope, the future it, was all a beautiful, grotesque lie built on the foundation of his greatest sin. He had changed their lives, just as the title had promised. He had given his son a voice. He had found a profound and healing love. But what he did next, the truth he had hidden, was what truly changed everything. It didn't change it for the better. It shattered it into a million irretrievable pieces, leaving him standing in the wreckage of a happiness he had never deserved, staring into the eyes of the woman whose family he had destroyed, and who had, in a cruel twist of fate, miraculously given his back to him. The clatter of a five-star kitchen was a symphony of order, but to Liam Croft, it was the sound of a life he no longer recognized. The world moved in a blur of polished silver and murmured conversations. For Liam Croft, each day was a carbon copy of the last. A grueling 12 hours, building his tech empire, followed by the profound, aching silence of the drive home. His fortune, a number with so many zeros it felt abstract, was a fortress he had built. Now, he lived trapped inside its cold, gilded walls. His sole reason for breathing was in the back seat of the town car, strapped into his custom car seat. Leo, 5 years old with his mother's wild, curling hair and eyes the color of a summer storm, stared out the window at the passing lights. He had not spoken a word since the car accident 2 years ago that had stolen Sarah. The doctors called it selective mutism, a trauma response. Liam called it a life sentence of quiet despair. "We're here, buddy," Liam said, his voice unnaturally loud in the quiet car. Leo didn't turn. Echoes, Liam thought, unlocking the door to their sterile penthouse. "We're just echoes of the people we used to be." His phone buzzed incessantly. A merger, a acquisition, a world waiting on his command. He silenced it with a swipe of his thumb. The only call he would ever want to receive would never come again. The following Saturday, desperate to break the routine, he took Leo to a small sun-drenched bistro tucked away from his usual haunts. It was the kind of place Sarah would have loved, colorful, slightly chaotic, and alive. He chose a quiet corner table, Leo clutching his favorite toy train, his body angled away from the world. A young waitress with ink-stained fingers and a smile that didn't seem to cost her anything approached. "Hi there, I'm Clara," What can I get for you two today? Liam ordered a coffee and a grilled cheese, his tone clipped, efficient. He didn't have the energy for small talk. When Clara returned with the plates, she didn't just set them down. She crouched so she was at eye level with Leo, who was steadfastly ignoring her. I see you've brought a very important engineer with you today, she said softly. Not to Liam, but to Leo. She pointed to his train. That's a beautiful locomotive. Does it have a name? Leo's gaze remained fixed on the window. Liam's jaw tightened. He's nonverbal. He won't answer you. Clara's eyes, a warm, intelligent brown, flickered to Liam for just a second, not with pity, but with a quiet understanding that unnerved him. Then she looked back at Leo. That's okay, she murmured. Sometimes words are too heavy to carry. She pointed to her own mouth, then to her ear. But sounds are light. Listen. She took a small porcelain creamer pitcher from her tray. She tapped a spoon against it gently. Ting. Leo's fingers stilled on his train. She tapped it again. A little softer. Ting. Then she did something extraordinary. She brought the pitcher close to her lips and made a soft, low humming sound into its opening. The sound amplified, transforming into a gentle, resonant ooh. Leo's head turned a fraction of an inch. Your turn, Clara whispered, her voice a conspiratorial thread. She held the pitcher out, toward him, an invitation. Liam held his breath. Don't, he thought, a protective surge rising in his chest. Don't make him try. Don't make him fail. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, so slowly, it was almost imperceptible, Leo reached out a small, tentative hand. He didn't take the pitcher. Instead, he placed his hand on its cool surface. Clara hummed again, her voice vibrating through the porcelain into his fingertips. Ooh. Leo's lips parted. A tiny, breathy whisper of air escaped. Ha 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 ha. It wasn't a word. It was barely a sound, but it was the most profound noise Liam had heard in 2 years. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone. He watched, utterly transfixed, as this stranger, this waitress with ink-stained fingers, did the impossible. She wasn't forcing him to speak. She was inviting him to play. She spent 5 more minutes at their table, a lifetime in the world of restaurant service. She showed him how to make a ch sound like a train by flicking his tongue, and how a she could be the sound of the wind. Leo didn't make another sound, but his eyes were locked on hers, bright and focused. When she finally stood to attend to other tables, she left the small creamer pitcher on the table. In case the engineer needs to signal the station, she said with a wink to Leo. The ride home was different. The silence wasn't empty. It was buzzing with potential. Leo held the creamer pitcher in his lap, staring at it as if it held the secrets of the universe. That night, lying in his king-sized bed in a room that felt vast and empty, Liam couldn't sleep. Clara's face, her gentle persistence, the tiny breathy ha 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 ha, from his son it played on a loop in his mind. He had hired the best speech therapists, the most renowned child psychologists. They had charts, methods, they had never once left him with a creamer pitcher. He felt a dangerous, fragile thing unfurl in his chest. Hope. And with it came a terrifying realization. This woman, in a 5-minute interaction, had reached a part of his son he couldn't. The emotion that followed this thought was not gratitude, but a sharp, possessive jealousy. He was Leo's father. He was supposed to be his world. The next morning, he made a call to his head of security. I need a background check. Clara Walsh. She works at the Sunlit Corner Bistro on Elm. He told himself it was due diligence. He was a wealthy man. He needed to know who was influencing his vulnerable son. He was protecting Leo. It was a father's job. The report landed in his inbox 2 days later. It was thorough. 26 years old, art school dropout, works 2 jobs, the bistro, and as a part-time aide at Oak Ridge Elementary. Clean record, lives in a small walk-up in a modest part of the city. Parents deceased. No siblings, an orphan, he thought, and the word struck him with a strange, painful resonance. Then, at the very bottom of the report, under a section titled Notable Personal History, was a single, stark line that made the world tilt on its axis. Subject was the sole survivor of a multi-vehicle collision on the I-94 highway on October 12, 2 years ago. The accident resulted in 3 fatalities. Liam's breath caught in his throat. The date burned into his retinas. October 12th, he knew that date. He knew the stretch of I-94. He scrolled frantically, his fingers clumsy on the glass screen of his tablet, pulling up the digital news archive he kept, but could never bring himself to read. There it was. The headline from his own personal ground zero. Tech CEO's wife killed in tragic chain reaction. Collision on I-94. His eyes scanned the article, words leaping out at him. A jackknife truck. Multiple vehicles. Sarah Croft, 34, pronounced dead at the scene. And then, the final sentence, one he had been too consumed by his own grief to ever register. The incident also claimed the lives of John and Maria Walsh, whose vehicle was struck by the initial debris. Their daughter, Clara, 24, was transported to County General in critical condition. The air left his lungs in a rush. The tablet clattered to the marble floor. John and Maria Walsh. Clara Walsh. The world shrank, then exploded. The random, cruel hand of fate had not been random at all. The woman who had just given his son a voice was the same woman whose parents had died in the accident. that had taken his wife? The same accident that had shattered his son. He stared at Leo, who was sitting on the floor, carefully rolling his train back and forth, humming a soft, tuneless note, a new sound, a gift from Clara. And in that moment, Liam Croft, the billionaire who could solve any problem, control any outcome, was utterly, terrifyingly lost. The foundation of his grief, his anger, his entire world for the past 2 years, was built on a lie of separation. They were not separate tragedies. They were two sides of the same devastating coin. What he did next would change everything. But as he stood there, the truth washing over him in nauseating waves, he had no idea that the change would begin with the destruction of his own soul.